Okay, we're still with the 26th extension to the 552nd sub-prediction, which runs to Adar 11, which is March the 5th. The reason I ran it to Adar 11 is that that's 50 days after Tebeth 21, which is the end of the 7 times of the Lord's Witnesses 2NC alienation times malediction, from when we were appointed over the last bunch of 2NCs, which were the Gentile called 2NCs, 2010, Tebeth 21, on the late 2NC Pentecost, the last possible Pentecost day to be appointed. So the malediction has to have ended then. I mean, we had the fire sign in Israel on 2010, Chislev 21, and I thought possibly that's when we were appointed, because Elijah goes up the mountain to the top of Carmel and does a mushroom shape with his body, and then tells the attendant to look for a rising mushroom-shaped cloud, which is the fire sign we've been trying to predict. And if I go up the mountain on that day, it could symbolise an appointment to an installation, because a mountain symbolises an administration, because a mountain has oversight over the land, which is the congregation. But there was one more. The last possibility was Tebeth 21. And so the go back 7 times that Elijah then tells his attendant to do must end Tebeth 21, 2017. You go to the next Pentecost after that for the Super Pentecost pact, because the Pentecost is a Sabbath, a 0th Sabbath, then 7 more Sabbaths, and then the 50 count day after that. So the 0th Sabbath was Tebeth 21, which was a no-show, 2010. You go to 7 more of those Pentecosts, late 20 Pentecosts from 2011 to 2017, Tebeth 21. Then you go to the 50 count day after that, and what is that day? Well, whatever it is, it's got to occur in the next 50 days, because these are 50 counts. These Baalian or Asherian Pentecosts we're looking at are just sequential 50 counts. So the most it can be is 50 days away from Tebeth 21, and that would take you to Adar 11. So we must have 2 fire signs before Adar 11. But when are they? Well, the contest in 1 Kings 18 has prophets of Baal and prophets of Asherah who are invited. Only the prophets of Baal show up. The Asherah prophets don't show up. So they stand for no-shows, predictions that don't work. They had no interest in the contest. They stand for nothing will happen. Whereas the Baal did have an interest and competed, but lost. So they are interested in fire signs. But the Watchtower became Baalian when it became a false church, and the prophets of Jehovah within it were no longer prophets of Jehovah once they fell as a true church and became false, and they became prophets of Baal. So you count the Baalian Pentecost from when the prophets of Baal came into existence, when the Watchtower fell, 2005 Sivan 12, and you count the Asherian ones. We thought from our first prediction date for the Watchtower being destroyed, but we actually made 2 predictions prior to that. The very first prediction we made, in the contest it says that Elijah tells Ahab to go up to the Passover, celebrate it, which was me getting annoyed with them when Dan Siglick died and telling them go and celebrate this thing properly and stop messing about, and they did actually do that. And we also went to New York to try and celebrate it with them, but to no avail. And coming back, after celebrating it, we were in the airport actually on the day, on ER14 2006. We celebrated it in Chicago first, Nissan 14. Then we went to celebrate it in New York, 2006 ER14. And I was in the airport with Dave, and we thought, okay, well, let's go back 7 times from here. We're up the mountain. We've just had the celebration. Because mountain, we thought in those days meant festival, which it can mean, because you go up to the mountain of Jehovah for a festival. But a better interpretation is an appointment or an installation, actually. Anyway, in those days we thought it was a festival. So then you go back 7 times to ER21, and that was our very first prediction, which didn't work. And we didn't think that was going to blow up the Watchtower. We didn't think that, because we predicted in the Sign of Jonah letter that there would be a nuclear bomb, that the fallout from which damaged the Watchtower itself and rendered the Bethel to be a desolate place like Judas's lodging place. But we also thought there would be some kind of a warning bomb before, which we didn't know what form it would take. And we thought that might occur on ER21. We never thought at the time that the Watchtower distraction bomb was incorrect, but we went for this warning bomb. And when it didn't occur on ER21, we had a conference call, ER22 2006, and everybody on the call said, there is nothing at all, which is the fulfillment of 1 Kings 18:43, when the attendant came back and said, well, I can't see anything, there's nothing. So that was our first no-show prediction. So we now run the Asherian Pentecost from 2006 ER21 rather than Sivan 12, which was the first prediction failure for a destruction of the Watchtower. But it wasn't our actual first no-show. The first no-show was 2006 ER21. And we tried counting these things in BLC days and that didn't work. So now we're counting them in solar days. We tried both actually, but not since Tebeth 21 have we tried the solar days, so that's our last option actually. I mean, Pentecosts under law were counted in solar days. They were counted in weekly Sabbaths. And we don't really know whether the 2NC Pentecost is counted in weekly or lunar days because it doesn't cross the end of the year from Adar to Nisan. So we don't really know. But I can make arguments both ways. But the BLC didn't work, so now we're going solar. So the 93rd Baalian Pentecost, counting in solar days, Gregorian days, from 2005 Sivan 12, which is incidentally when they became a false church, so that will be the Sabbath release, the 0th Sabbath, the release from divine law. And then day 1 of the count would be Sivan 13. So the 93rd of those Pentecosts is 2017 Shabbat 21. These are solar days. And that is 4,600 solar days after the 0th day of 2005 Sivan 12. So that's the second fire sign. Now 2017 Shabbat 21 is the last day of First Watchtower Cakes. Now the First Watchtower Cakes, it was from the First Watchtower Passover on Sivan 14, when absolutely nothing happened. But that's okay, because we understand, we have for some time, but we've never properly applied it to this situation. God is very merciful. He gives everybody a second chance, and particularly at the Passover, under law you had the opportunity to celebrate a late Passover if you missed the first, because missing a Passover was you got thrown out of Israel, you got ejected from the congregation if you did that. It was important. So you have a second chance. And it's the same with the Passover executions that are going to befall the Watchtower. If you don't turn up at the First Watchtower Passover Shabbat 14, you can turn up at Adar 14. And if you don't turn up at both of them, and you should have done, and you're a firstborn, then you get Passover execution. So there's one more month people can still turn up in the mercy of God. But this complicates things rather, because there's 3 Watchtower Passovers. One for the Pharaoh's, sitting on Pharaoh's throne, another one for the handmaiden grinding at the mill, at the congregation person, and the final one, the third one, for the prisons. And we thought that was it, until we realised actually there's a late Passover for each one of those, which means there's a total actually of 4 Passovers. And it means that, for example, the late First Watchtower is coincident with the Second Watchtower. But the blood on the doorway for the First Watchtower and the late First Watchtower is on the left doorpost, and for the Second Watchtower is on the lintel. So we're going to have, and different groups have to go to, so anybody from the Bethel needs to go to the celebration which has a victim, a Passover victim who is from the Bethel, or one in Sea Reserve, and you need to put the door on the left, the blood on the left doorpost. Whereas if you're from the congregations, you need to go to a different Passover where the victim is also from the congregations, and you put the blood on the lintel. So we're going to have to run 2 Passovers at the same time, which should be fun. So there are 4 in total, and that's why we didn't see anything. We didn't have to on Shabbat 14, but we will have to see something, and there'll have to be a real Passover which will succeed and will occur on Adar 14 if we have this chronology right. But Shabbat 21 was First Watchtower Cakes. Now nobody attended the Shabbat 14 Passover, so nobody escapes. Well, actually that isn't strictly true. That from the Watchtower, that is true. Nobody escapes from the Watchtower during First Watchtower Cakes between Shabbat 15 and 21, because nobody celebrated the Passover. However, it was also the late Laodicean Passover, because the regular Laodicean Passover was Tebeth 14, so the late one is Shabbat 14. And people did escape from Laodicea out of the Watchtower, we understand, in the escape boat of John 6:19, and they resigned from the Watchtower, Laodicea, en masse, 2017, Tebeth 21, the last day of Laodicean cakes. But then the last day of late Laodicean cakes, they come here, which completes their escape, because it's no good escaping out of one prison and going into another prison. They need to now escape out of, well, they're not in a prison actually, to be fair. They became a true church on Tebeth 16. And they are dry land, which means that they don't have a water baptism, but they do nonetheless have a baptism into the first Abrahamic covenant, a baptism to be a citizen, and some kind of a priest, citizen type priest, which I don't understand, I believe, from the 10 lepers account, one of whom managed to give thanks and turn back, and gratitude is expressed by being a priest and helping God out. So they are a true church, and they have a baptism. They've had it, if I'm not mistaken, since Tebeth 23, having had a visit from the Holy Spirit on Tebeth 22, telling them about the baptism. And they were installed from Tebeth 16 to 22, 7 whole days, and then they're operational as with their baptism, Tebeth 23. And that baptism runs for 195 days of Abraham's negotiation with God over Sodom, which is 6.5 months, and it runs to Ab 7, 2018, and then on Ab 8, third Holy Spirit takes over Zoa. Ab 8 is the late second one in C Pentecost, and that's the last possible day the Holy Spirit could take over Zoa. And we now have it doing it on that day, which leads us to believe that's one of the many reasons that we can't push this forward anymore. So there's the second fast sign, on Shabbat 21. It's also 30 days after the Laodicean boat departed of John 6:19, and they have to row 25 or 30 stadia before they get to the land they want, and so they arrive here 30 days later, Shabbat 21. And the 2 spies, we think, arrive on Shabbat 16, which is today, which is first fruits, late first fruits, and that would be 20 times of the sentence count of Joshua 2 verse 23, after they spend 3 days they leave on the 21st. They spend 3 days hiding in the Watchtower mountain, hiding in that mountain, 21, 22, 23. Then they spend another 3 days when they hear about the vision, sitting in the mountain of Laodicea, which they can run, 24, 25, 26. Then they take 20 days to come over here, the sentence count of Joshua 2:23, and it says they turned back, the 2 spies, they descended from the mountain of Laodicea, they pass over, so they did celebrate the late Passover, and then they come to Joshua and they tell him everything that's happened to them, and that counts as 20 times, and I look forward to hearing everything that's happened, because we know nothing about Laodicea other than what we've deduced from the Bible. Nobody else has told it us, even if it exists, but it exists. So that's the second fast sign. The third fast sign is Asherian. It's the 86th Asherian Pentecost from 2006 ER21, and that day is Adar 3, which is a fascinating day. Again, it's solar, counting it solar, because Adar 3 is the second non-Sabbath day of the second month of the Shabbat 1 secular year, and that's the fulfillment of 2 Chronicles 3:2, when we start building the temple. When Solomon started building the temple on the second day of the second month, 4th regnal year. It actually just says the second, not the second day. So we can take that to be the second non-Sabbath day, or second Sabbath day, or whatever we want. We take it to be second non-Sabbath day, and then it becomes the 3rd day of the month actually. And that's when we start building the temple. Now it also says in Ezra 6:15 that they finished building the temple on Adar 3. So when I first looked at this, I was a bit confused. I thought, what's going on here? Do we finish building the temple on Adar 3, or do we start building the temple? But actually it says they finished building the temple, Zerubbabel, Adar 3, and Solomon started building the temple, Adar 3. And they are the angels in the greater meaning. And you have to finish sealing the stones. The angels have to finish choosing the stones and sealing them before the humans can build them into a temple. So it's perfect timing. So the angels have finished sealing everybody into the EARC. All the 2 NCs will be sealed before we start constructing a temple made out of them on Adar 3. So the 2 great things that are going to happen to this church is that the whole of Laodicea turns up. Well, the spies turning up is good on Shabbat 16 if we have that right, but Laodicea turning up is, well, that's also good. And then we start building the temple on Adar 3. And both of those big events, Satan tries to distract and rain on those parades by having fire signs, so that he can try and upstage and obscure the glory that's going on. And in terms of Revelation 7, no wind is allowed to blow until all the saints are sealed. And no harm is supposed to occur to the earth or the trees until all the saints are sealed. And if the stones are all prepared and ready, then all the stones are sealed and the heavenly part of the temple building is completed on Adar 3. So that means that the winds can start blowing. It seems to indicate that the British sign on Shabbat 21 won't be as bad as the American sign on Adar 3. And even that sign isn't so bad, because Satan is bound by a chain for 1,000 days of Revelation 20. The first 1,000 days of the 42 months, which run from his landing down here at the bottom of Jacob's ladder on Ab 1 2015, 30 days of Jacob's ladder from Tammuz 1 2015, 1600 stadia from our appointment 2010 Tebeth 21, that was the start of our alienation times. And 42 months takes you to the end of the Sabbath year, the end of the Shabbat 1 secular year on Tebeth 30 2018. But the first 1,000 days takes you to ER 10, and that's when the last saint enters into the late third Watchtower Passover. That kind of nails the Watchtower Passovers, actually. And when the last saint is in, Satan's led off the chain and things get worse, and the Great Tribulation begins Sivan 7, which is 27 days after he's led off the chain. So there's a progression. The second fire sign isn't too bad, but I think it's quite bad, because if we're right with our secular chronology, Russia has to go on a rampage of 48 days, ending on Nisan 11, at which point the four-headed beast takes over for 4 months to Ab 11, at which point the fourth beast of Daniel 7, the 10-horned horrible beast, takes over for 10 months to Sivan 11, 2019, which is the when I see Pentecost, when the kingdom of God begins and the world ends. So 48 days before 2018 Nisan 11 is 2017 Shabbat 23, which is 2 days after the British fire sign. So it seems to indicate that whatever happens to Britain on Shabbat 21, we seem to blame Russia for it, or the result of it anyway is that 2 days later Russia decides to conquer NATO, and it actually succeeds in conquering NATO, but then it gets conquered after the whole thing takes 48 days. It's a mutual disaster where Russia conquers the whole planet and then its military gets wiped out, presumably by a nuclear bomb, or several of them, which is a fairly apocalyptic scenario, but even that isn't the Great Tribulation. So there's a totally depressing thought. So physically, things happen very quickly once they start. Anyway, here's the beautiful thought, which we had wrong in the last talk. The 11th of the 11th of the 11th of the 11th. Shabbat 11 was the 11th day of the 11th month of the 11th year of the contest of 1 Kings 18, which began 2006 ER1, actually, with my sign of Jonah letter. And so, the first secular year by Hebrew counting, sacred year, 2007 Nisan 1, and the 11th 2017 Nisan 1, and so the 11th month, 11th year will be Shabbat 2017, 11th day will be Shabbat 11. And we thought there'd be a fire sign on Shabbat 11, and Jesus would then come as a result. We were wrong. It's not a day of war, it's a day of peace. The First World War ended at the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month. 11th hour of November 11, 1918. It's a day of peace. And the First World War was started by demons, but presumably it was ended by the angels. It was ended by a lot of lost suffering from humans, but the angels would have had a hand in ending it. Blessed are the peacemakers, just as the demons would have had a hand in starting it. So it's a day of peace, 11. We thought Jesus would come on that day in the form of Peter, because the scripture says Peter stood up with the 11. But actually I think it means the following. Peter is already standing up as a human. He did that when he got on the ladder and came down Jacob's ladder on Ab 17, 2017 and arrived here, Elul 17. So that standing up's already occurring. He's already been installed as a priest over Zoa, installed on Tishri 5, 2017, the late Zoa Pentecost of Zeron to Zoa, we believe. And he's not going to join Zoa until we baptise him into it on Ab 8, 2018. Peter stood up with the 11. In scriptural terms, that isn't just, he came along and shook somebody's hand. Standing up means taking some authority. And the only authority that isn't covered so far is the secular rulership, becoming Caesar to mankind. And I'd made a mistake previously. I hadn't understood that when you become a priest, it's a 50-day process. Well, actually, it's a 7-day process individually, but a 50-day process as a priesthood. But when you become a king, it's instant. You just get anointed, and everyone says, "Long live the king." Now, we know that we're in a Shabbat 1 year because there was a Watchtower Passover, Shabbat 14, and that instigates a new year whenever there's a Passover, according to Exodus 12. And because a Passover must occur on the 14th day of the first month of a year, and if there's one on the 14th day of Shabbat, there's got to be a Shabbat 1 year. But also, you only get a new year when there's a new secular king. That's the reason for it. So there must be a new secular king in Shabbat, which is the 11th month of the 11th year of the contest. So that is pointing towards it happening on the 11th. So we know that we get Peter standing up as our Caesar in Shabbat 2017, and we know that he stands up on the 11th. So we now understand he stands up as Caesar on the 11th. Also, that means that we rule with the Christ for 1,000 days, from the 11th of Shabbat 2017 to 2020 Heshvan 20 or 21, which is 200 Pentecost, which would be when we would take over ourselves, and that will be the end of the 1,000 days of David and Solomon being co-regent, which is the 1,000 day, it isn't quite the 1,000 day LW Sabbath. Our LW Sabbath began on Tebeth 30, but it always takes 11 days before they're established. The 11 days is a transition period to God. It takes 11 years in the case of the 6,000 year working week and the 1,000 year Sabbath, and it takes 1,000 days in the case of the 6,000 day LW working week with a 158 day gap for Zoe installation when we died and got reinstalled, and then the 1,000 day Sabbath. This is where it gets confusing. The 1,000 day of ruling with the Christ is the last 989 days of the 1,000 day Sabbath of the Lord's witnesses plus a further 11 days. And likewise, we rule with the Christ for 1,000 years, which is not the 1,000 years of the ARC Sabbath, which started 11 years prior to, 10 years ago. It's 989 years of that 1,000 years, and then 11 years into the next working week. So these things are staggered but by this 11-year transition period. It's exactly like when Trump was elected president, and then there's a transition between Obama and him. You don't just get Obama 1 minute president and then the election and then bam, Trump. You get this transition period when the one government hands over to the other. And likewise with the heavenly election, all that the kingdom of God is. Satan would have you think it's the end of the world, which it is actually. But end of the world only in the sense that it's the end of his administration of the world. The people continue, other than the ones who go to Gehenna, which is only a temporary sin bin. So it's a transition, it's a heavenly presidential election. And Jesus won that, and there's an 11-year transition period from 2008, actually Sivan 11, the 100 Pentecost. And by 2019, Sivan 11, Jesus is absolutely installed as the president of the planet. Caesar to the planet, to the world. But he becomes Caesar to the true church on Shabbat 11. That's when Peter stands up with the 11. And we think it probably was the 11th hour of Shabbat 11. So the beauty of the 11th hour of 11th day of 11th month of 11th year of the contest is not a nuclear bomb, thank God. It is the appointment of Jesus and the third Holy Spirit as Caesar, secular ruler, to the true church, Zoa, which means, in theory, we don't have to pay any more tax. But we shall have to see how that transpires. It's quite simple now, 1 Kings 18, once you understand it. You go back the 7 times to Tebeth 21. Then you go to the next, Asherian or Baalian or Divine Pentecost. And you count them solar, And you count the Asherian one from 2006, ER21, the Baalian one from 2005, Sivan 12, and the divine one is actually the Laodicean Pentecost on 2017, Adar 5, which is 2 days after the 86th Asherian on 2017 Adar 3. Now 2017 Adar 3 is February 24 to 25, 2017 Adar 5 is February 26, 27, and Shabbat 21 is February 12, 13. Those are the fire signs. Now there's lots of other beautiful things that have come out of this new chronology. The main thing that's come out of it is that, you know, we've realised that all these Passovers are double Passovers, and that's witnessed to very cleverly in Ezekiel 47, where Ezekiel is made to pass over the waters of ankles. Then he passes over the waters of knees, and then he passes over the waters of hips. It's always waters of two things, because there's two Passovers. And it's also witnessed to by the parallel account of Solomon's inauguration of the temple, where it's booths, but in the greater meaning it's cakes, booths. And there are two accounts of it, one in 1 Kings something, 8 or something, and the other in 2 Chronicles, I'm going to get this wrong, 2 Chronicles 7, that's right. They're two parallel accounts of the same festival, because there are actually two festivals. It's an account of ER 2018, ER 15 to 21, which is both the late third Watchtower cakes and first Adamic cakes. So there's two different. Actually, that doesn't prove it. Sorry, that doesn't prove it. That just proves that's different proof. That proves that the Adamic and the Watchtower Passover are coincident. It's Ezekiel that proves that there's two Passovers for one. There's always a late version of it. So we've got a shed load more Passovers to add to the Passovers. I mean, the Watchtower Passover still is Shabbat 14, the first one, 2017. But the late version is Adar 14, and that's when the Passover execution is. God cannot execute you at the first Passover, because he doesn't know whether you might turn up at the late Passover. So all the executions are at the late Passover. Now, Adar is the month where the Jews killed everybody on very specific dates in Esther 9. They killed 75,000 in the jurisdictional districts on the 13th of Adar, and that's how many people we will baptize for the Adar 14 Passover. And then they killed 500 people in Shushan in the palace on Adar 13, and that's how many people in the Bethels that we will baptize for the Passover. And actually the two Passovers are witnessed there, because Adar 14, 2017 is the late first Watchtower Passover, and it is the regular second Watchtower Passover. The first Watchtower Passover is for the Bethels, Shushan, the palace, and the second Watchtower Passover is for the congregations, the jurisdictional districts. So we baptize 500 people who attend the late first Watchtower Passover, and we baptize 75,000 who attend the second Watchtower Passover for the congregations. There's no witness that we can see for how many people get Passover executed, because it doesn't. These were killed by the Jews, not by the Passover angel. And now we come to the great tragedy, which is also very prophetic. I've been struggling with it for some time. We know, and we base the accuracy of our predictions on the 11 times, prophetic times of Abraham's sacrifice, which run from 1943, Nisan 14 BC, when he crossed the Euphrates, inaugurating his covenant, to 11 prophetic times later, or 3,960 years, or 11 years a day, 3 years later, which is 2018 Nisan 14. And Abraham asked, by what shall I know that I shall take the kingdom as possession? And the answer is, well, you know it in 3,960 years' time on this very day, basically, in prophetic terms. And so the question is, well, why would he know it on Nisan 14? Because the first Watchtower Passover execution is in fact Adar 14. Why wouldn't he know it then? And here is the tragic and terrible answer to that. The Watchtower Passover execution on Adar 14 is of the Bethels. The Watchtower control everybody in the Bethels and control all information in the Bethels very effectively. They hid the fact that they would join the UN, and they're presently hiding the fact that there is a Laodicea, and they've hidden the fact that Laodicea has left, and that means actually that some governing body members who were Laodiceans will have left. They've hidden all of that. They've appointed a new governing body member, but they've hidden it all. So they will hide. If a few hundred people are Passover executed in the Bethels, they will hide that information. And furthermore, people won't really believe it's a Passover readily, because Passovers aren't expected to occur on Adar 14. They're expected to occur on Nisan 14. However, that isn't true on Nisan 14. That is the Passover execution of the 100,000 or so Watchtower congregations on the planet, and one, the oldest by water baptism in each, who doesn't attend our Passover, will die, and 1 in 2 reserves of the Watchtower congregations will die. I think the firstborns, whatever that means. I think that means the Gentile called ones. I don't actually know. But it's going to be around about 100,000 deaths, and they're going to be in the congregations, and it will be on Nisan 14, and that will not be hideable. The congregations can talk to people. Bethel do what they're told, not the congregations. They're more independent. And 100,000 deaths you cannot hide. And a Nisan 14 death is far more obviously a Passover death execution than is an Adar 14 death. So it will be the case that people see that Abraham, the sons of Abraham, that those in the 1 AC, they're actually constructive Abraham, and people who are literally Abrahamic, which is Laodiceans, and I guess people who are Isaac, which is Zerorites, because we are sons of Abraham and therefore we're Abraham to God. So we will see this, and people with faith who are contracted to be Abraham, sons of the first Abrahamic covenant, they will see it on Nisan 14. And that is the fulfillment of the 11 times. They will see God's done a Passover. Oh my God, he's done a Passover execution. That means the kingdom's coming. That means we will be taking it as a possession. They won't see it on Adar 14 because the Watchtower will hide it. What they should do is say there has been a Passover. You must decide what to do. They mustn't cover it up. That's what they should do, without a doubt. And finally, Revelation 18. Render to her as she rendered one time. Give to her twice the double, according to the works, plural, of her. 2 times 2 times 2, 8 times. In the cup which she mix double for her, 2 times. To the extent to which she lived in shameless luxury and something else, give her torment and mourning, 2 times 2, 4 times. That's 1 plus 8 plus 2 plus 4, 15 times. That is the extent of mourning due to Passover executions that the Watchtower suffers. The first one is Adar 14, 2017. 15 times. 15 months after that is Sivan 14, 2019. That is the third Abrahamic Passover. There is one more execution after that, the late third Abrahamic Passover. That's when all the last people die. Nobody mourns that in the Watchtower because they're all dead. So the one that it's the penultimate Passover execution that can result in Watchtower people mourning. The final Passover execution, you don't mourn it because you're not in a position to, because you're dead if you're not in the true church. So they actually do mourn Passover executions for 15 months. And that's an acute understanding of how long the world has after the first Passover execution is seen. There's actually 16 months of Passover executions, but only 15 of them can you mourn. Alright, so that's our latest chronology, and that's our latest understanding of the end of the division between Laodicea and Zoa, this church, which we look forward to immensely. Thank you.